Well, hi kids, children, adults, grandparents, people of all ages. You might be a cat, you might be a dog, or anything between, or an inanimate object like my cat currently is. Today I'm going to talk to you about dual booting Windows and OS X, aka Boot Camp, on a MacBook, of course. A genuine MacBook, not a Hackintosh. With including a storage partition that will work between both Windows and OS X, read and write, which is a big trick. Alright, the process to do such things, especially with running OS X Lion particularly, is a nightmare. I spent days trying to figure it out. Searching on Google helped for bits and pieces, but nothing ever put the full puzzle together. And after days of trial and error, I believe I've finally hit the solution. Okay, so before we continue, there are some downfalls. There are some things that aren't going to quite be exactly right or working 100%. So I'm going to kind of tell you, I actually wrote down the steps and procedures, so I might read some of it. So if I look like I'm reading, it's probably because I am. Alright, so of course, like I said, there's some sacrifices, but they're ones I can put up with. Maybe others may not be able to, but I can put up with these sacrifices. First, a boot hard drive can only have 4 partitions, period. And I believe that's true of OS X and Windows both. Here's the problem. What I found is OS X Lion hogs 3 partitions itself. That's why Boot Camp never probably works right if you have other partitions, because Lion has 3 partitions to itself. So here are the partition breakdowns. You will need to kind of know this when you're working on it, or it's good to know. There's a 600, okay, of course there's OS X Lion itself, your Macintosh HD. Then there's a 600 meg recovery partition, which you can see if you hold down the Option key upon boot up on your Mac. You will see recovery thing. This is for Lion, remember. And 3, the other partition is 200 megs. It seems to be a backup for the recovery partition. So if you or something happens to the recovery partition, it'll remutate it and recreate it. That's what I'm getting the impression of. Now, the steps that I'm about to tell you here in a couple minutes after I go through some of the other stuff, you got to do it in the exact order. You can't miss a step. You can't skip a step, or the whole thing's going to mess up. You could potentially blow up everything on your MacBook. I did twice to get it right. Finally, all the trial and error, I ended up messing up Windows and OS X Lion and everything twice. Or I had to completely wipe the whole thing clean and start over. Twice. I did have my data backed up, fortunately, before I got into this mess. And if you keep hearing a motorcycle, or idiot neighbor across the street keeps wanting to run his motorcycle and rev it up and it runs like crap, he needs to have a technician work on it, but he never will, because he's been doing this forever. Alright. So, of course, alright, so the downfalls. Once you get your partitions created for this, you will not be able to modify them at all. So make sure you plan carefully what sizes you want your partitions to be. So that's the first downfall. Second thing you're going to want to do as a preventative thing, I'm reinstalling Windows since it's an upgrade version. Second thing you want to do is, if possible, create an OS X Lion disk or flash drive, or make a system image of your OS X Lion, because if things go haywire, you'll have that as a backup to go back to. I, of course, recommend backing up your data before you do this because it's a high-risk thing. Also, because you're going to be blowing away some partitions here, you're going to need some kind of backup for OS X Lion if you don't have a disk of some sort already for it. Alright. So with that being said, the other downfall is you will lose your Lion recovery partitions. You aren't going to have a choice. Another downfall is your Windows Boot Camp partition is not going to show up on OS X Lion. When you're in OS X, you aren't going to see that partition. It might even look like free space. It's not even going to say Boot Camp. It just won't be there. Likewise, on OS X, you cannot choose what your default OS is going to be for startup. However, once you get Windows installed and install Boot Camp, you can do it from Windows. So it's still possible to choose the default. You just got to do it within Windows instead. Alright. Now we'll get into the steps. First step you're going to do, I got Windows reinstalled now. First step you're going to do is install OS X Lion if you don't already have it installed. If you already have OS X Lion installed, fine. And also, word of note, must be the only partition that you see in disk utility. No other partitions, unless you've already deleted your recovery partitions. So if you have other partitions, they have to go bye-bye. You have to have one that's fully to OS X Lion to start. Alright, so install OS X Lion. Next step, you're going to set up Boot Camp. You're going to create the partition size that you're going to need for Windows. And of course, you have to probably insert the Windows disk. We are doing Windows 7 here for the record. So of course, Boot Camp install will make your computer restart and you'll go into Windows Setup. Let it go into the Windows Setup. Now you're going to click through the install wizard in the Windows Setup until you get to the choice where if you want to upgrade it or do a custom install. And you're going to do a custom. Once you're here, you're going to see several partitions. You're going to see a 200 meg partition, your OS X Lion, Macintosh HD partition, 600 meg partition, and then this new partition you just created for Windows. At this point, what you're going to do is you're going to delete that 600 meg partition for Windows, or sorry, your 600 meg partition for your Recovery HD. Delete just that partition. Don't delete anything else. Just that one partition. Now, after you have deleted that 600 meg partition for your Recovery HD, you're going to cancel the Windows setup and you're going to reboot back into OS X. You may have to eject your Windows disk because otherwise it might boot right back up into Windows setup again. You don't want that. You want to go into OS X. Once you're back in OS X, you are going to go back into your disk utility. And from here, you're going to shrink your Macintosh HD to the size you're going to need for OS X, and the rest of that new free space you've created will be your storage partition. Now after that, you're going to format your storage partition either probably for exFat or FAT32, since the idea for this is to make your storage partition work between both Windows and OS X. You don't have any other choices really without third-party software. We're going without third-party software here. So exFat or FAT32. I've heard FAT32 is a little more stable partition-wise to get it working, but exFat is a lot less limited because you can do more than 4 gigs of data per file. So I went with that. I'm going to cross my fingers that the partition doesn't disappear because I've heard rumors sometimes it does. After you get that new partition made for your storage, you're now going to restart back into the Windows setup again, so you'll have to put your disk back in, restart, go back into Windows setup. And again, you're going to click through the wizard until you get to the custom option. You will go to custom again. Now at this point, you're going to see that 600 meg partition you deleted is back and rebuilt. This time, you're going to delete both that 200 meg and the 600 meg partitions. You're going to delete both of them. Which means, yes, you are going to lose probably about 800 megs of hard drive space that you are not going to be able to use again without wiping everything. So now after you've deleted those two partitions, you now have space where you can create your Windows partition. Because before that you couldn't even format it because there was already 4 partitions there. Now you can format. So format your boot camp partition for Windows. Go ahead and install Windows. And after Windows is installed, you should be good. You should see that new storage partition already in computer. When you open up computer, it should be there. At least it was for me. And I already tested it. Yes, I can read-write data on both OS X and Windows on that partition. So it's doing what I want it to do so far. And of course then you'll install your boot camp software on Windows to get your drivers to work. And also at that point it will then install the boot camp program that you can go up to and choose which your default OS is going to be. So you have to do that on Windows. It won't, because if you go back in OS X, it's not going to show boot camp or anything, because technically you're kind of manually installing Windows and partially. So anyway, yes, it's a lot of steps. It's a mess. You've got to do it, at least in this particular situation, you've got to do it in that exact sequence and all those steps, or it doesn't work. And if you mess up something, you could potentially blow away everything. So like I said before, make sure your data is backed up if you're going to try to take this on. Do not activate Windows until you're 100% sure that everything is working correctly and tested and true. Because otherwise, if you mess up something, you might end up doing it all over again, like I did probably 8 or 9 times before I finally got it right. So yes, OS X and disk management, that is not very easy to deal with. And it's a lot of work to create this storage partition. However, it's going to be much faster being on your internal hard drive. Likewise, you don't have to lug another drive around and use a very important USB port when you only have 2, and don't have to lug around a USB hub either. So, this is Nerdgong, and I approve this message. Maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. It did work on my white MacBook 2009 model. And it's Windows 7 32-bit that I'm going to be running because it's a lighter footprint. I will upgrade to 4 gigs of RAM if I get this working right. So, anyway, say bye-bye.